Good morning and welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Society of Albany. My name is Reverend Sam Trumbore and I serve as minister of this congregation. Before we begin, please check to make sure your microphone is muted. The same for your camera if your image is potentially distracting. Please also be mindful of your speech while on Zoom, as microphones have a way of accidentally getting unmuted. This will minimize any disruption of our service. You will notice closed captioning at the bottom of your screen. If you'd like to turn that off or turn it on, find the CC option on your Zoom toolbar and select the up arrow to access it. Thanks so much for your cooperation. This is now a time of transition from ordinary time to sacred time. Time to check in with your body, to collect your attention, to be present in this moment. Let this moment be separated from yesterday and tomorrow. May this virtual space become a sanctuary for the next hour. Allow your screen to transform into a virtual community hall to experience images, sounds, and music, songs, poetry, and prose that will lift your heart, broaden your mind, and move you to do justice in the world in the service of building beloved community. May this virtual service be holy time for each of us that joins us together in the celebration of life. And our prelude this morning is Fox Hunter's Jig / Humors of Derry Crossan, traditional Irish tunes. And Zach Cunningham is sharing his talent on the mandolin. Thank you, Zach. And let us light our chalice together with the words you'll see on the screen. Welcoming all free seekers of truth and meaning, we gather to excite the human spirit, to inspire its growth and development, to respond morally and ethically to a troubled world, and to sustain a vital and nurturing religious community. And we're going to sing De Colores, a traditional Spanish folk tune. And our song leaders are Randy Rosette and Chris Jensen. Thank you, Randy and Chris. Our wisdom tale comes by way of Yse Barnwell and will be read by Cor. Well, welcome to Albany UU for our Facebook viewers joining us. And I have some opening words for you that come from Lynn Cox. Invitation to join the journey. Come, come, you accidental pilgrims, you who find yourself on a journey of surprise and wonder. Come, you who emerge into this place as an act of liberation. Come, you who seek a life of mindfulness and a place to test your thoughts. Come, you who bring hearts of all kinds, heavy hearts, rusty hearts, hearts broken open in revelation, hearts full of love to share. Come, you who seek courage, and you who have more courage than you realize. Come, you who stand behind the curtain, gathering up the resources to claim your truth. Come, you who have been in a bubble, you who are poised for transformation. We bring our story again, gathering love, courage, mindfulness, and a sense of purpose. We gather as a people of all ages, of different abilities, different backgrounds, and different perspectives. We share a covenant, a direction for shared journey, and a commitment to encourage and challenge one another to spiritual growth. This path will ask much from us. Let us move forward with love. Let us move forward with appreciation for one another. Let us move forward knowing we are not alone. Whoever you are, whatever your gifts, you are welcome to join this journey. And I have a video reading for you something this morning, something a little different. Nadia Bolz-Weber will be sharing with you, I Wish I Had a Hall Pass.
There were a few months of my life I came down with just a touch of hypochondria. I was a stay-at-home mom with a baby and a toddler. I was exhausted all the time and got sick a lot. And I started to think that something was seriously wrong with me. And secretly, without being totally conscious of it, I really hoped something was seriously wrong with me. Nothing fatal. And then I could kind of get a hall pass. A hospital stay started to look awesome. I mean, someone else would bring me food and I could lay around all day watching TV and taking narcotics. What's not to love, right? But after ending up in my doctor's office for the third time in 6 weeks, my doctor looked me in the eye and God bless him, he said, "Nadia, nothing's wrong with you. You just have to deal with your life." So as a side note, I never went back to that doctor, but I've remained grateful that he dared to not play along with my story. So there's this story in the Bible where Jesus encounters a man who was ill and had been sitting next to a pool of healing water for 38 years. And Jesus asks him this really harsh question. He goes, "Do you want to be made well?" And the guy just says that he tries to get into the waters, but other people always get in his way. I've started thinking about how hard it is to be honest about the payoffs we get from the things we say we want to be free from. When I was drinking, I'd bemoan my hangovers and the fact I couldn't manage to keep a decent job, but there was a payoff. I got to live without any real responsibility, and I got to be inebriated whenever the results of my bad decisions started feeling bad. Some of us spend money we don't have on things we don't need, which boosts our mood until we get the bills, which is then so depressing we have to start the whole damn thing over again and shop more just to boost our mood again, all while we complain about being in debt. It's like clutching our bills and having Jesus walk by and say, "Do you really want to be free from debt?" Jesus is just the worst sometimes. But to the man who was sitting at the healing pool for 38 years, not only does he say, "Do you want to be made well?" He also says, "Stand up, take your mat, and walk." You already have everything you need. Stop waiting for someone to carry you. Stop waiting for other people to not be in your way. I'm not saying that with enough faith you can heal yourself or somehow pull your life up by the bootstraps. Sometimes there's not much we can do about the shit life hands us. I'm just saying that one aspect of faith is that we get to heal even from the story we tell ourselves about why we don't have what we say we want. In other words, we get to just deal with our lives.
And a meditation from Scott Taylor. Wooed into this world. Let us turn inward to reflect on these words. Who dreamed you into being? What stories sat in their heart as they imagined what you could become? Who helped you imagine your story? Who helped you see your place in the story of the world? And what matters the most? Who helped you understand that you could be the author of your own unfolding? All of which is a way of asking who listened. Who listened until you could hear yourself speak, until you trusted the voice that was your own. And what about those stories of others? Those kept in cramped spaces of silence for fear of how hard and narrow this world of ours can be. Who needs your listening so their story can be set free? Whose story needs to be held in your heart so it knows it is worth entering into the world? These questions are about listening, but really, it's about love. It is through affection that our stories are born. They are wooed into this world. And this, it is through loving the stories that we might discover they love us back. Let us take these words and our own thoughts and reflections into a silent meditation. I begin my words this morning with an apology for a personal story I told last Sunday of an incident in North Oakland. Although it was not my intention to cause harm, I take responsibility for the impact of my story. It was a story that involved violence that may have triggered unpleasant memories of trauma for some. I know for some the content of the story was hurtful. Unintentionally, the racial references in the story reinforced stereotypes that I personally and our congregation collectively is committed to weaken and dismantle. The story was also a poor choice for the tender time following the Chauvin verdict and the violence at the Albany Police South Station. I'm sad and regretful to say my story was an illustration of the danger of a single story. I chose the video of the Reverend Nadia Bolz-Weber today because she illustrates the danger that comes from being absorbed in one's own story. She responded to the challenges of being a stay-at-home mom with a baby and a toddler in ways that harmed herself and others. She was locked in her story about her life and her dysfunctional coping strategies. She quoted a biblical story found in the beginning of the 5th chapter of the Gospel of John. By the sheep gate in Jerusalem in those days was a pool called Bethesda. This was a special pool with healing waters. The healing only happened when the waters were agitated or troubled, hence the source of the song, God's going to trouble the waters. Heavenly messengers or angels were thought to be the agents of the water's movement. When that movement was detected, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed who were waiting nearby rushed into the pool with the hope that they would be healed. Now, 38 years is a long time to be waiting near these waters for healing. One might say this paralytic was stuck in his story, that this was the only way that he could be healed. When Jesus challenged him, "Do you want to get well?" the paralytic doesn't respond yes. He rationalizes why he hasn't. He doesn't have anyone to put him in the pool. And if he did, someone else would get in there first. This is such a familiar story. I'm sure we've all heard it, and some of us maybe have told a similar story ourselves. I can't get or have what I want or need because of someone or something else. I'm the helpless victim of my circumstances, and I have no control over my life. Jesus' challenge is pretty harsh, as Nadia observes. Do you want to get well? Or for the context of our service today, do you want to break out of your self-limiting single story? The stories we tell ourselves are extremely powerful in shaping our lives. Our brains are organized to make sense of the world through narrative. Every part of our lives has stories associated with it. Every one of us has a birth story. Somehow an egg and a sperm found each other, and presto, change-o, our individual existence started. Each egg came from a woman who had a life story. Each sperm came from a man who had a life story. However, that embryo gestated into a baby, and however whatever arrangement of family cared for and nurtured that baby into childhood, then adulthood, had a story. The growth and development process of that human being participated in creating a story that would shape the rest of their lives. That story didn't get created in a vacuum. It happened within whatever communities, educational, and religious institutions which that growing child participated. Each one had their own stories situated in history and culture. You can see how this ever-growing web of stories shape our identity that harden into beliefs and values, ethics and ideals. So much of who we are isn't of our own creation, but absorbed without thinking from the stories in which we are raised and taught. And until we meet someone outside our bubble, we don't even realize how much our worldview is shaped by all the narratives that surround us. We don't even realize we're telling ourselves a story we didn't create. We've identified with it so strongly. That's one of the reasons why I enjoy Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's famous TED Talk released in July of 2009. She describes her experience of growing up in Nigeria, the child of a university professor. She started reading at an early age and was writing before she began elementary school. She grew up relating to the cultures of the world. So when she arrived to go to school in the United States, she was surprised by the diluted story her roommate had projected on her of coming from a rural village, living in a hut with a dirt floor and a thatched roof, such as she might have seen in a National Geographic magazine or on the Discovery Channel. Her roommate hadn't expected that she could use a stove or listen to or enjoy contemporary Western music. What I so appreciate about Adichie is she doesn't exempt herself from the danger of a single story. She absorbed American prejudice about Mexicans. She listened to the news reports of people striving to cross the southern border and the racist discussion of immigration controversies. She had the opportunity to visit Mexico and arrived with biased ideas, much like her roommate. She was surprised to see a modern city that didn't look so different from an American metropolitan city. She realized she had fooled herself by her uncritical acceptance of an American single story she'd picked up in the media. This is happening to us all the time. We all have limited experiences of the world. I've never been to it, lived in Alabama or Georgia or Dubai or Moscow or Shanghai or Lahore or New Delhi or Nairobi or Glasgow for that matter. I know I have prejudices and stereotypes floating around in my head that are untrue, yet bias my opinions about these places and the rest of the world. This is especially true of developing parts of the world. My trips to Thailand and Sri Lanka were greatly enriched by the indigenous people I met and our conversations and meals together. Well, I suspect we all know this, yet we don't hold all our stories lightly, willing to modify them when we get new information or learn something new. Why? We get strongly attached to our stories and integrate them into our identity. My stories, in fact, define who I am and what I value and believe. Not only are my stories important to me, they are very important to my tribe, to the people with whom I closely identify. And in a time of social polarization, the stories we share become even more important. Science educator Neil deGrasse Tyson tells this story. I read it last week in the New York Times Magazine, of a husband of a coworker who didn't believe that astronauts had landed on the moon. It was all fake, he said. Tyson asked him if he was willing to consider evidence that would prove it to be true. The man said yes. Tyson asked him what kind of evidence would be persuasive. He said, actual pictures of men on the moon. So Tyson sent him to a website full of those kind of pictures. After he had visited the website, Tyson asked him if he had been persuaded. The man responded that yes, the pictures were very interesting, but it was a NASA website, and he was suspicious that NASA had faked them. Tyson responded, aha, I see you are not open to being persuaded by evidence. We really don't have much to talk about. Such is the sorry state of the poor paralytic beside the healing waters. For most of his life, 38 years is a long time, he has been languishing beside that pool of healing waters, expecting to be saved and making up stories to explain why it hasn't happened. Yet when Jesus tells him, get up, pick up your mat and walk around, he picks up his mat and started walking. One way to understand this story is literally. Jesus used his supernatural healing power and the man was healed. Bolz-Weber doesn't do that, nor will I. A better story is Jesus challenged his single story of healing failure and helplessness and challenged him to take charge of his life. The challenge shook him out of his narrative long enough to pick up his mat and discover at some point healing had happened. What held him back from realizing it was his previous story about himself. He was caught in the self-limiting story of helplessness and hopelessness. They're powerful parallels with addiction. Substance abuse can lock people into self-destructive stories and identities that are quite difficult to change and break out of. This is especially true based on one's way of the body metabolizing addictive substances or the family addiction story into which one is born and raised. Sometimes an inner or outer jolt is needed to break the hold of the story. Someone might need to say, Nadia, nothing is wrong with you. You just need to deal with your life. Someone might need to tell you, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. That happened to me last Sunday. I am very attached to the story I told because it initiated some important transformations in my life. It is a touchstone story that has changed how I live and engage with life. It is parallels with how getting hit by a car on my moped at the age of 20 altered the course of my life too. As a side note, today I'm striving for other ways to wake up than getting hit by something. So when my story was criticized after I told it, it brought up a lot of emotion for me. It put in doubt all that learning and all that transformation. Had I deluded myself? Had I taken the wrong lesson from my experience? Had it reinforced my biases rather than broken them? As I processed my story and the reactions, I consciously worked to let go of my attachments and allow in the questioning. Had I not told the story effectively, could I have added or subtracted something from the story that would have made it less potentially harmful? What I realized in conversation with Jorah Cohen and Anne-Marie Haber was the harmful elements of the story were built into the story. I couldn't tell the story publicly without potentially causing harm because of the way it could reinforce other people's harmful stories. It just isn't an appropriate story to tell in this context. What I'm happy to report is the result of that processing was finding resolution and a new story. Now I understand my old story in new and different ways that has clarified it. Now I know how to work with that story in the future to lessen the possibility that it might cause harm. Now I have an even greater appreciation for the value of dialogue. When someone tells me my words or actions have caused harm, it is a moment when learning, growth, and development can happen. And learning, growth, and development is meaningful, of high value, and very satisfying to me, even if it is unpleasant and painful in the process. We are all walking around with damaging stories in us. This is the ground implicit bias and racism grow in. Without being hyper alert to defending our minds against them, they implant themselves in us like viruses and use us to reproduce and infect others. Social media has amplified and accelerated the reinfection rate to dangerous levels. Our minds are very vulnerable to infection through repetition without vigorous critical thinking defenses. And even then, they sneak through. Built into our Unitarian Universalist anti-authoritarian approach to religion are tools we need. A recognition of the importance and value of multiple viewpoints and diverse experiences is a powerful defense against single stories. Implicit and becoming more explicit is our commitment to non-harming. If I say or do something that causes harm, I have a responsibility to respond and be accountable for what I say or do. That goes for all of us, but especially for those in leadership positions. We are human. So we are going to tell stories. Some of those stories will affirm universal elements of our humanity. Some of those stories will be full of delusions and errors. By telling, revising, and retelling those stories again and again, potentially, they can get better and better. That refining process will take many different perspectives and life experiences, the kind of diversity we celebrate and encourage in our congregations. Some stories will become life-giving touchstones. Some stories will need to be retired. And some new stories will be born in their place. Many stories, not just one. So be it.
Good morning. I'm Eric Von Hausen, and I'll be your service associate today. An important way we celebrate life each Sunday is by offering an opportunity to practice generosity. Members and friends support our congregation with an annual pledge paid throughout the year. Another way to support the good work of this congregation is by making a generous contribution via one of the options shown on the next slide. You can click on the tiny URL link in the chat window to contribute, or you can send a text to the number shown on the screen. The examples on the slide show how to label your text to indicate the amount and the purpose or intent of your gift. We must now say goodbye to our Facebook friends. Consider joining us on Zoom next time by visiting albanyuu.org. Our offertory music today is Harper Valley PTA by Tom T. Hall, musician Jeannie C. Riley.
And now we'll have a community message from Jean Poppy.
At the beginning of this church year, our Board of Trustees gave the Social Responsibilities Council a formal charge to engage the congregation in discussion and discernment of the two UUA 2020 General Assembly actions of immediate witness for recommendations regarding a possible course of action for Albany UU. Some of you may have participated in our forum in September discussing AIW number 1, Amen to Uprising, or the forum in December when we heard from congregants Jill Peckinpah and Jay Holly, who served respectively in Albany and Del Mar on their New York State Police Reform and Reinvention collaboratives. These collaborative reports are now available, and I hope you are reading at least the summary and recommendations of your particular police department. Today, many of us are trying to get our heads around the violent police actions in Albany aimed at Black protesters. On April 14th, a day when the Chauvin verdict was announced that brought relief and perhaps some hope, and then again on April 22nd, Albany police attacked Black bodies at South Station. AIW Amen to Uprising addresses what it means to affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person, promote justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, and genuinely proclaim through our actions that Black lives matter. It speaks to an increasingly militarized police force such as we saw in Albany. And it asks us to consider how our communities might look if we defunded the police, that is, reallocated monies to create a more humane system, such as Dr. Alice Green of the Center for Law and Justice has imagined. She calls for the establishment of a bifurcated City of Albany Department of Public Safety, which would house two equal status components: the Division of Law Enforcement, performing law enforcement functions currently provided by the APD, and the Division of Citizen Safety and Oversight, which would include, among other things, an empowered community police review board. You can read more online about Dr. Green's thought-provoking responses to the Albany Police Collaborative. You can watch the very unsettling videos provided by Channel 13, for example, of the events on the 14th and 22nd. And you can also hear from the South Station protesters themselves by searching online for recordings of their press conferences and other gatherings. The AIW, the Action for Immediate Witness, calls for those of us with white privilege to amplify Black voices, frequently discounted, often demonized by those in power. As you learn more, I would urge you, especially Albany residents, to send texts or emails to the mayor, to the chief of police, and to your city council representative, calling out the violence and intimidation, and perhaps calling for an independent investigation. The Albany Police Collaborative report eloquently speaks to the creation of an ongoing working relationship between the community and police, addressing the history of mistreatment of communities of color, systemic racism, and implicit bias. These recent events in Albany suggest there is much work to be done. May healing and accountability take place.
Now is the time set aside in our service for sharing significant personal milestones in our lives. There are 3 ways that you can share a joy or sorrow. The first option is to type your joy or sorrow in the chat window. Please put the words "read aloud" at the beginning of your message if you would like us to do that. Please also consider connecting privately in the chat window with a pastoral care associate. Today, the pastoral care associates on duty are myself, Randy Rosette, and Donna Meixner. Both of us have the initials PCA in front of our name. The second option is to click the raise hand symbol found either in the participant window or under the reactions button. Our technician will invite you to unmute yourself and speak your joy or sorrow. The third option is to submit a joy or sorrow using our website by noon on Friday prior to the service. We'll begin by reading those right now that were submitted this past week. Then we'll hear the spoken joys and sorrows, followed by the chat entries that are to be read aloud.
And we begin with a joy submitted by Jay Holly. She tells us that her enormous joy is that I got to have a real visit with my mom in her assisted living in Virginia. No plexiglass barriers, no duct tape markers for distancing on the floor. For the first time in a very long time, I hugged my 91-year-old mother. I don't have words to describe how that felt, but I think we all can feel that. Would anybody like to share live right now? And I don't see anybody with a raised hand, so we should go on to the chat entries.
All righty. So Cindy Herrick says that Orthodox Easter is today, and it reminds her that even our religious calendar is a constructed story. We also hear from Peggy and John Sherman that John's father, James Sherman, and his uncle, Robert Govey, recently died. Deborah, I think that might be Deb Vogel, although I might be wrong, says that my wonderful friend Bob Wareham is losing his courageous battle with cancer. He was taken to St. Peter's Hospice yesterday. Please hold him and his family in our thoughts. His wife, Mary Baker, has attended Albany UU occasionally. Then iPhone, I'm not sure who this is, I apologize, says that after a long search, they've moved to Glenmont. Seems very happy about that. That's a joy. And Mitch and Anne Marie say that my 48-year-old cousin, David Maker, collapsed suddenly at work and died. He was a Capital District resident and the engaged dad of a 5-year-old son. Jeff Wright-Sedum says he's so proud of his eldest son, Jay, who is graduating from UAlbany this month. Tony Daniel says that she fell on Monday and broke her left ulna and radius. It's all pinned and plated and she's home in a cast. She's uncomfortable, but it's not unbearable. Let's see, Carol Pink was the person who is saying that she has a joy of moving to Glenmont. Great. And I think that's everything, Chris. For the joys and sorrows that remain unspoken, let us hold all that we've heard and felt in our hearts today.
Thank you, Randy. And I have a prayer of affirmation from Karen Johnson. Constellations of our lives. Let us turn inward. Humans make maps of the stars, choosing some stars, ignoring others to project our imaginations into the heavens. These maps shift over time across cultures. Names change for the same assemblage of bright points: Drinking Gourd, Big Dipper, Plow, the Cherokee Lost Hunters, the Tibetan Septarishi. Humans make constellations by connecting stars. Humans make meaning by connecting stories. Story to story, narrative to story. Some blaze bright, some are faint. Most are backdrop to the great and mundane human unfolding. Let us imagine the stories of our lives as a starry universe above our heads. As free seekers of truth and meaning, we are tasked and trusted to draw constellations in this our beloved small universe. May the stories we connect draw constellations that reflect a shared ministry that calls out the best in us. So be it. And let us enjoy this closing hymn, What a Wonderful World. And Elena will sing it.
As we extinguish the chalice, please join us in the words shown on the screen. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. For the benediction, I'd like to read a poem by Peter Vector called Unity in Diversity. Unified in diversity, that's what people today should be. Humans embracing harmony and happiness, hope that flowers from the seed that will allow us all to prosper. Why does color or race matter? Why not join together instead of being scrambled and scattered? Why can't we not just plainly see the unity in diversity? People will be people all the same, and under the setting sun, nothing may ever change. But I'm here to take a stand, to show the world how to finally be unified in diversity. Our thanks today to musicians Zach Cunningham, Elena Karpoff, Chris Jensen, and Randy Rosette. The ushers were Tammy Hathaway, Chuck Manning, and Jean Poppy. Pastoral care associates today were Randy Rosette and Donna Meixner. Community message from Jean Poppy. Welcomer was Barb Manning. Service associate, yours truly, Eric Van Housen. Technical support, Chris Jensen, and office support, Elizabeth Valdez.